Hi, my name is Spurrier, and you are listening to Dom of X.
All right, how is it going, everybody? My name is Dom of X, comicreleases.com assistant editor, although people have told me recently to change the name because I don't cover as much X-Men content, but that is besides the point. This has been a long time coming for me. You know him as the guy who wrote X-Club, Ghost Rider Danny Ketch, X-Force, X-Men Legacy, Way of X, Legion of X, one of the brilliant minds of Sinister, Coda, now the man who is authoring the pen of Wally West, the fastest man alive, and of course, Hellblazer, not one, but two Hellblazer series. Spurrier, how are you doing today, man?
How are you?
No, I'm doing well as well. Thank you so much for joining me. And again, I was talking about this with a little bit with you backstage, but it was like I meant to reach out to you 3 years ago when I was doing an X-Men podcast because I'm reading your Nightcrawler and Legion stuff, and it's like I want to talk to this guy. I never got a chance to because of external circumstances, but now it's like I got to talk to you now about something which is more than nothing. So no, I appreciate it.
It's a great pleasure.
No, thank you. And of course, I usually ask this question all the time to my interviewees. I would like to know how you got your start in comics. I know that you got into the industry fairly early, back in the year 2007, 2008, with a couple of Image series and some Marvel ones here and there. I remember like seeing your name on a Wolverine series back. But yeah, how did you get into comics?
Quite late, I suppose. I didn't really pick up what we would call like a mature comic, by which I mean not the kids comic, a sort of Dandy Beano stuff we have here in the UK. I didn't pick up anything that you would think of as a mature comic until I was probably 16 or 17. So it wasn't sort of dyed into the wool. I believe it was a Judge Dredd comic that I picked up, which immediately sent me down a hole towards 2000 AD, which is a comic we have here in the UK.
Right.
It's
And
like
now
a
you're
comic
writing 2000 AD, right? It's
yeah,
insane.
went a long time away and then went back again quite recently. It's just the most remarkable publication. Every week it comes out. It's got 4 or 5 anthology stories in it. Judge Dredd's probably the most famous one, but there are others that I've sort of become so desperately fond of. I always knew I wanted to write. I had around that time the beginnings of a career as a novelist as well, which I sort of pursued on a different track. So I have I have various hats that I wear. I've done
Hmm.
novels, I've done screenwriting, and I do comics. At some point, I encountered comics and thought, in a sort of arrogant teenage way, well, I can do that. I could do that better than anyone. And just spent a good couple of years sending in quite bad submissions to the 2000 AD submissions space. They're quite useful, actually. It's a slight digression, but it's one of the only still existing publications that makes a point of looking for and trying to hire new writers as well as new artists. And they have this clever little format called a future shock, which is a very short, done in one science fiction story with a twist in the tale. That's kind of how Alan Moore and Grant
Hmm.
Morrison and Garth Ennis and all these names that you're familiar with that would
Right.
have emerged from our side of the Atlantic got their start. It's how I got my start.
Oh.
So I did a ton of work for 2000 AD, loved every minute of it. Another digression, the thing you need to know about 2000 AD is that because each issue, each chapter of your story is only 4 or 5 pages long, you have to be very dense. You have to be very compressed. Um, Andy Diggle edited it when I got my first job, and he used to call it a shot full of rocket fuel. You want the readers to be blown away by this thing. You don't want them to stop for a breath. You want it to be really good value for money. That's a thing that stayed with me ever since. You don't want to be spending what $5 on a comic that takes you 30 seconds to read.
Right.
You want to revisit it, and
Hmm.
this has followed me throughout my whole career. There's a reason I'm known as quite a wordy and
Yeah, it's
dense
very true.
writer. I want my readers to feel like they're getting an experience. I want them to want to go back and read it a second time to see what they can get out of it. And that was all very much inculcated into me as a young writer when I was working for 2000 AD. And then at some point in the sort of magical osmosis of comics, I ended up chatting to people in the American sphere. There was a really great guy, still around actually, called Aubrey Citizen, who was an editor for
Yep.
Marvel.
Editor for Marvel. Yep.
So he, I think, gave me my first jobs doing like the Wolverine mini you mentioned and Silver Surfer. And yeah, it just sort of bubbled away from there. It's just about sort of keeping your foot on the pressure. And yeah, the hustle is real.
It very much is. Yeah, it seems like for well, an industry that it seems like you sort of have to like take a lot of steps to like get into and then get through. Well, to see you come out of it which is so cool. I consider you part of one of the the second British invasion with the with Al Ewing and Kieran Gillen and creators like that. I'll even throw like I know like Dan Waters. You know, I even get to throw him into that mix. But I get to see you coming out from well building yourself up with a whole lot of books. Like I could sit here, I feel like talking to you about like for hours with your early stuff too, not only big two or but also at Image and boom. um it's it's very nice
It's a
to
hell
see
of a
that like you've gotten a lot of the like respected and critical acclaim. I think like you know that a lot of your other peers have gotten, which is
well,
I
thank you.
think super gratifying to see for you and
It's
your
always
end.
interesting to me, like the first big two work I did, very quickly positioned me as a fan of the Vertigo mentality, a fan of that sort of um, vaguely horror leaning, quite cerebral voice, which fits very nicely with those of us who came out of the 2000 AD um, park that I was just waffling about.
Hmm.
You know, this sort of notion of density and notion of compressed storytelling. And that really fit with the sort of Vertigo vibe. So because my first superhero work took a similar tack, I think I quite quickly became associated with that vibe. You know, I hesitate to say pigeonholed, but it sometimes feels like that. You know, I'm not somebody that they naturally think of when they need a writer for the Avengers or the Justice League or whatever, because that's just not my natural ground.
Hmm.
Now, I have always maintained that when people give me unexpected opportunities, as with the Flash, as with the X-Men, things that don't feel like a natural fit for somebody who's a bit of a weirdo
Right.
who writes these sort of um, slightly eccentric, heavily subtexty stories. It often is some of my best work because when somebody challenges you to do something new with something familiar, that can often create the best results. Um, so yeah, my journey has been a strange one, and I still don't think I'm ever going to get the call to be the guy who writes Spider-Man. But
You
the
should
fact that
someday. You wrote a great
I mean,
Kurt
I would love to.
Spider-Man.
I would love to. That would be a dream come true, and all of these things would be a dream come true. But it's you can understand from an editor's perspective, and look, we'll come into this because it's like a real bugbear. But the safe money, if you're responsible for trying to generate money in an industry which is always
Hmm.
changing, always seems to be, but probably isn't contracting quite as simplistically as it appears. The smart money is just doing the same thing over and over again. And that's sort of why we end up with these cycles of repetitive, familiar, comforting stories
Hmm.
that don't seem to really break the mold very much, but I would argue are quite unhealthy because
Hmm.
all they're doing is repeating the hits, gradually whittling away. Like the emphasis seems to be on attracting old readers back to comics rather than shattering them old and introducing new readers to comics. Um, all of which is to say it's a dynamic and interesting time, and I'm sort of happy to accept whatever challenge I'm given. And if the challenge was write a middle of the road superhero story that does 100 things that have been done before, that's probably the one time when I go, nope, don't want to do that. I'm out. Anything else, I'm up for it.
You know, I know that you definitely kept my eyes in with Kurt and introducing him to, hey, maybe he's not 100% on board with whatever Krakoa is doing, and getting to see him and his journey along with all of the people who decided to go on board with him, including the people from the new X-Men generation, not the Grant Morrison one, but all the characters you brought in from there, and of course like getting to see that, and now you're on Flash and you did like two Hellblazer runs. So I know that for me, because I am one of the younger readers out there. It was definitely nice to not only get to read a different voice for the characters, but know that there's always something fluctuating out there that is sort of different from the mold, and I appreciate you bringing in for me from that perspective.
Thank you, thank you. I mean, Flash is a great case in point. They sort of the run that preceded mine, Jeremy Adams, was like spectacular in my view. It's just the best superhero comicery that I can think of. Um, it would have been foolish of them to try and follow that with more middle of the road, straight down the line superhero. So they're like, let's do something different. Let's change it. Let's
Mhm.
find a new voice. Let's do it in a different direction. And that's the sort of thing that makes people think of me. So it was a great challenge, but I've enjoyed every moment of it.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I am enjoying your fly. I reread it some last night, not only in preparation for the interview, but I'm like, what, let me see if the second read through like sticks with me as much as the first, because I really appreciate that you brought in again like a different perspective, and also the horror-y scientific vibe aspect of it. I want to ask before though, how did you get the gig? Because you had just wrapped up your X-Men stuff with the real rest of the, or were in the process of wrapping up your X-Men stuff. And Dawn of
Mhm.
DC comes around, and it's new creative team. It's you and Deodato Jr. It's different direction from the previous 35 issues or so that came before. How did that come about? How did the DC reach out to you, or what was the process there?
Uh, you'll need to forgive a scrambled memory. I have two young kids, so remembering things in the right order or with any level of detail is not always possible. But my recollection is that into the midst of the maelstrom you describe, where I was working way too much, I was exhausted, I wasn't sleeping very well, there just weren't enough minutes in the day. I think this all happened before we knew that the Krakoa era was starting to wind down. So, it was still very much pedal to the metal, all hands to the pumps. And then my editor, a lovely man called Chris Rosa, who had previously been at Boom
Hmm.
Studios, and then came to be part of the DC team, unknown to me, was in charge of casting this change in direction for the Flash book. He thought of me because I mean that's kind of the way it goes often in this industry. It's not so much about here is a long list of 1,000 different creators. Let's choose one and see how we do. It's about editors with whom you've worked previously, or editors who have been part of a team with whom you've worked previously, or editors who've just been in contact with you because they've enjoyed something you've written before. You never know where these opportunities are going to come from, but it's very rarely the sort of the linear direction you expect.
Hmm.
He reached out to me out of the blue, said, "Love your stuff." I think we'd worked tangentially together on some other bits and pieces that I had done, like one shots I'd done for DC over the years. So we hadn't really been in direct communication, but we'd been part of the same email threads. Um, he evidently felt that if you were going to do something different and weird and new with the Flash, then that's the sort of thing that you could challenge me to do. I think he probably approached multiple people. I don't know this for sure, but I don't think I can't imagine I was the only person he approached. And my approach to pitching was, I don't really have time. I'm basically dead already from being overworked. So I might as well pitch something that's so completely batshit and out there that they're never going to say yes to it. And if by some miracle they do say yes to it, I won't be able to say no because I'm going to have such a lot of fun writing it. And that's what I pitched. I sat down and I thought about it. And it's like a recurring theme in my superhero work. I maintain that if these incredible characters existed in our real world, it would be quite horrifying for an awful lot of people, not least the people with these powers. And I read reread in many cases a lot of the best Flash stories out there, and I kind of slowly realized that there's this really interesting friction between stories which start from the perspective of, well, he can run really fast and you don't need to understand why. That's not important. Just watch him go and do some stuff. And there's another separate canon of stories which are all about we need to lean heavily into understanding how and why he does this stuff, which relies upon a whole ton of like cod science and really getting into the nitty gritty and the detail of the why and the how of it. And both of those ideas, both of those approaches have their virtues, but they also annoy me for different reasons. And it kind of slowly came to me that there is a third route, which is to say the the way that this power comes to people is so unutterably ineffable, so much an expression of a higher reality that our puny human brains could never understand, that asking how it works is kind of silly. It's impossible to understand it. All you can do is try to fit it into whatever human perspective you can approach it with, and then run with the idea of, okay, so we don't fully understand it, but what can it do? And what does it feel like to have this power that you don't fully understand? And I imagine that's quite frightening. I
Right,
imagine
it
that's,
is.
that's like running on very thin ice, not knowing whether it might break, not knowing how deep the water is below you, but you have to keep running because there's something very important you have to do. And the metaphor that slowly came to my mind was this kind of rugged, all-American frontiersman striding across hill and dale, prospecting for oil. And that's like a quintessential part of the American folk heroic tradition. Somebody who is striking it big, somebody who's earning a fortune, somebody who's enriching their community and enriching their family and doing it all for the right reasons. But then if you cut forward a couple of hundred years to the present day, our planet's dying, there's smog in the air, fossil fuels are murdering our children
Mhm.
slowly, and it's all because somebody decided to exploit this thing that they
Mhm.
did not understand
Mhm.
for what they thought was the common good, for what they thought was the right reasons. But it blew up
It
really badly. Once you start poking that thing, you can't then stop poking it. So anyway, all of that fed into this pitch that I put together, which was all about losing oneself in cosmic horror and the sort of the human core of it. And P.S., based on what I just told you about being exhausted at the time and writing too many books and being a dad and being a novelist and being a comics writer and racing around and doing all of these things, it's no great surprise that the sort of human heart of the story that went into this pitch was one about a person trying to do too many things, trying to be too many things. And I think for me, that's what makes Wally West. It's one of the things that makes Wally West such a fantastic character. He's a hero, and he's an apprentice, and he's a husband, and he's a father, and he's an engineer, and he's a role model. And he's trying to do all of those things.
Mhm.
Now, if I tried to do all those things, I would have a mental breakdown, but that's not a very interesting concept. Right, so the story is literally about this guy who is flirting with having a mental breakdown, using these astonishingly complicated powers to find an exit, to find a way out, to sort of feather his nest slightly in a way that lets him do it all. And it all falls apart and it gets very trippy. And there are extraordinary cosmic entities who are exploiting his uncertainty. But anyway, that's to give you a little snapshot of all the ingredients that were going into this pitch. And as I say, I put it together and sent it off thinking there's no way they're going to go for that. And it came back saying, we want this. So it was like a
That is
groan of,
so
oh God, what
awesome.
have I looked
That
at?
that is so awesome, man. Big congrats on that, obviously, and now you're getting to write a lot more. But reading this, like the metaphor that I got for myself, or the whole meaning that I got for myself, and this was, I think, very prevalent in the first arc with the split panels that Deodato's doing for yours, the letters by Hassan, I cannot say his last name for the life of me, but the weird way that they're all tricked around is that like life is a lot more complex and not as black and white as we see it. And I'm getting yeah, those vibes and that message of like this isn't the like just because that you run super fast, you're given all of these different privileges as a superhero doesn't necessarily make you the happiest man on the planet. Like there's a lot more nuance to it, and I really appreciate that you brought not only that like my perspective, but I'm learning something from your Flash. Like it's making me think in that way.
Well,
Maybe I'm
that's what I
thinking
really want.
making thinking a bit too off the edge, but that's what I got from the entirety so
No,
far
I
of what you
think
brought.
that's exactly it, and it's the greatest thing. It's the greatest compliment I can imagine that people are moved. People are changed. People are affected by what I've written. It doesn't even have to be positively all the time. People can come to me and say, "Well, it made me think, but it made me angry." That's okay. If it made you think, that's good enough for me. What I hate, what I resist, what I think is a really dangerous tendency is the simplification of things. And it's not just true of comics, but it's definitely true of comics. It's also true in any storytelling medium you
Hmm.
care to name. We are coming to the point that simple is more important than true. And I hate that.
I hate that too.
I hate that we're teaching our kids that you can fix problems by punching them. I hate that we're teaching our kids that the world, anything that's wrong with the world is as a consequence of somebody who is a dyed-in-the-wool villain, and anything that's good in the world is the consequence of somebody who is a true and pure hero. I mean, it's just not true. We can look for heroes and villains as aspirational role models, people that we wish we could be like, but look closely and they're just human. I mean, that's like go back to the earliest pantheons of gods, the Greek gods, the Minoan gods, the Egyptian gods,
Hmm.
they're just as venal and petty as any human. They're squabbling soap opera stories because people recognize that gods can't just be perfect and pure. They also have to teach us about how to be flawed, how to be imperfect. Otherwise, they're just these unapproachable, unattainable archetypes. Anyway, I'm waffling. You get the point. There's an awful lot of this sort of thought
No, keep
process that
going
goes.
on, man.
No, but I mean, you can see why, they end up getting me to write Hellblazer because these are all very John Constantine thoughts.
Hmm.
Simple is the enemy of right, in my view. Um, what I quite like about writing superhero comics is that you can start with all of these um, suspicions, cynicisms, pessimistic takes on the whole binary dynamic of good and evil, but generally, when you get right down to it, like the climactic moment in most of the stories I write really does have somebody going, right now, in this moment, I'm going to do the right thing. And that's aspirational. To me, it's so much more powerful when somebody who is flawed or weak or imperfect or tired or just a bit confused does the right thing. That tells me so much more and feels so much more valuable than somebody who never made a mistake in their life doing the right thing again. Well done, round of
Hmm.
applause, seal clap. It's just boring to
Hmm.
me to see that. So anyway, that's my approach.
No, it's great to hear that because I think a lot of the drama that you're bringing into this book with Wally and his family as well, with Linda, the kids, it's all I find it also engaging because it like the thought of bringing drama and I think in like some of your books too, like you did this with Kurt in Legion and Way of X, Hum and his wife in your book Coda. It's just like you're living with contradictions that cause you pain but like aren't solvable. I find that to be one of the strongest parts about your work, and it seems like you're not only bringing this into Flash, but it's something like it's a life lesson that you're bringing into all of your books that we can learn. I think that's it's brilliant.
Thank you. I mean, it has a great deal to do with being a father, honestly. You sort of find yourself sitting there writing these little stories which are ultimately like moral parables. And if I'm uncomfortable about something, if I'm uncomfortable teaching my son about, like when my son gets in trouble at school because he's been hitting somebody, and you're like, why did you do that? Well, he was mean to me, but you still don't hit that person. And yet here I am writing 22 pages of stories about big muscly people hitting each other because they were mean to them. Well, there's a bit of a hypocrisy going on here. So I get it. I'm not doing down the entire subgenre of superheroes because they can be transformatively aspirational and beautiful. But at their laziest, at their most decompressed, at their most stupid, they are not helping the world in any way that I recognize. And so every time I get the chance to tell a story that fits into this beautiful curve, that hits all the beats that we want the action, we want the costumes, we want to be transported to these incredible worlds where people are larger than life. I get that. I don't have any problem with that. But you can have all that and elevate. You can be human. You can point towards achievable, moral,
Hmm.
but imperfect goals, which makes everybody happy. And that's, I think, one of the most powerful things you can do as a writer in superhero comics.
No, no, it's very exciting to see that you're taking them to again a subconscious level that like sometimes like we don't think of, right? Like versus the larger than life aspect of what a lot of people see like, oh, like these are DC superheroes, role models that we should always aspire to be, but it's also like I can't relate to somebody if I feel like they're not going through enough pain or if I don't think that they're going through enough pain. And I think there's a beauty in that, in knowing that there's like yeah, Wally is running through like and he's punching a lot of stuff. Like that's cool, but like I can never run at the level that Wally can. I can never be connected to this existential force of like whatever it might be. Like but I know that I'm going through like I'm in school, like I've got work, I have business to conduct, and it feels like I'm juggling around that much. But it's nice to see that represented on the pages of something that I'm reading.
Well,
Um,
isn't I mean
yeah.
it's a conversation we hear a lot about Superman, for instance. Writers who have never tried writing Superman say things like, he's boring, he's too powerful, he's overbuffed, there's never really a real threat to him that I can really truly believe in. The stakes are too low because he's too powerful. And I always think that's so unimaginative. If you really wanted to, you could throw any sort of nonsensical enemy at him. But it's not about enemies from the outside. It's about what if he has a headache? What if he has a bad day? What if a beloved pet? There are enough crippling small things in our human lives that bring us down without us having to focus on these kind of epic gladiatorial battles, which frankly we're sort of taught from an early age to be a little bit awkward. We should never be a violent person. You
Hmm.
should never take out your revenge on the people around you. And yet that's the sort of entertainment we have. And I get it. It's fulfilling a role. Somebody, a very, very good, very, very accomplished and very popular comics writer, who I won't name because I agree with almost everything they say most of the time, was saying on Twitter the other day, or Blue Sky probably because Twitter's dead now, but they were saying, don't understand why we can't just have villains being villains. Why do they always have to be humanized and complicated and having all these deep thoughts? Why can't they just be middle of the road bad people? And there was a chorus of, yeah, yeah, why not? Why not? I want my villains to just be villains. And I was sitting there going, well, there's a reason that the world is the way it is. There's a reason that let's not get into it, but American politics is so divided at the moment. There's no middle ground. There's no, I disagree with you on X, Y, Z, but I still love you because we have common ground. We share the same morals. We're the same species. We have the same family. Instead, it's that person is wrong, therefore I'm right. And the other person is saying that person is wrong, therefore I'm right. And I think that's a consequence of this line of thought that says everybody can be reduced to either a goody or a baddie. And that's plumbed into us from an early age. And I really, really worry about it as a way of seeing the universe.
Cause yeah, it's like it's not again. It's not just about the black and white of morale. Like if that were true, I mean, wouldn't life be a lot simpler than it already is? So
That's
yeah.
exactly why it's so popular, because we all want a holiday from complexity. We all live in a big, scary world that doesn't make sense and it's chaotic and it's complicated. And so, if we can give readers a little dose of simplicity, they love it. And I get that. Again, I have no problem with any of that. My problem is when that simplicity is serving up a version of the world which people start to believe is. is true, and they
Mhm.
start to act as if the real world is as simple as this, is as binary as this. Anyway, I'm waffling. You've got me on a right old rant here. Sorry, let's
Oh,
change the subject.
no, this is awesome. I again, I really appreciate, again, like from what I am getting as the big message in your book is that life is a lot more complex than we think, and it's shown in not only by your script but also the artists that you've worked with on the book, Leodato, Ramon Perez, Georgiev, and as well as your fantastic letterer, Hassan. So big kudos to you,
They're all
and
great.
oh, so awesome, so awesome. I have to ask a couple specifics about the book, though, while I do have you here, including most recently, spoilers for anybody who hasn't read it. Go to your local comic shop and pick up issue number 14, which is a good on jumping on point with the DC All In initiative. So, Barry Allen, he has been. Ever since he's been back with, since John's brought him back into the fold with Flash Rebirth, has sort of taken over, if you will, as the main guy who's been connected with the Speed Force. Obviously, for the last 3 years, we've had something different. Was him retiring in this issue, like, was that always your goal? Just like as a like, hey, Wally's the guy running around now. We don't need necessarily like two guys. Like, what are your thoughts on that, if I may ask?
No, absolutely nothing to do with me at all. And just to give you a little peek behind the curtain, when you write one of the main DC characters, you get to set the tone. You get to say, my character is doing this. Here are the changes to the character. But if the note comes down on high that during this super event X happens to that character, you have to be reactive. You have to roll with it. Um, I inherited a book in which Wally was to be the protagonist, and I thought about it at length and listened very closely to the sort of discourse that I could access online, and realized that there was enough desire out there for Barry to feature that it would be silly of me not to grapple with that in some way. So in the first two arcs, issues 1 through 13, Barry features quite highly. He's in and out of the story. There are phases of it where you could even argue that he's the main character. Mostly it's Wally, but to argue that Barry is not critical to Wally's identity would be silly. So I think some of my favorite parts in that arc are about the moments when Wally and Barry have to confront one another and share their
Mm-hmm.
views, share their feelings, share their stories. Those are powerful. Nonetheless, the word came down from on high that the plan was that Barry was going to be depowered, and there
Mm-hmm.
were reasons for it, reasons that I agree with and thought were very powerful. Um, and could I please reflect that in my story? And there was a version of it which I was immediately going to veer towards, in which it was treated like this sort of funeral vibe, oh, Barry's lost his powers, we need to mourn for him. But I, being me, being slightly perverse and always taking the road less traveled, I came to the decision that actually Barry's the sort of person who would at least try to put a positive spin on it.
Mm-hmm.
He's seen so much, he's been to so many places, he's beheld such an extraordinarily broad view of reality that I'm guessing if somebody said to him, you can't do that anymore, you're a normal guy now, all you get to do is hang out with your beautiful girlfriend and drink a beer and have a nice quiet life. There's a little bit of him that's like, I can do that. You know what? I've earned that. This is my chance to be the sort of person whose life I have always been interested in. Like he says a line in issue 14, something like, as superheroes, we spend our lives trying to make sure that people can live their lives in peace. And I finally get to do that. I finally get to be the person who lives the life that I've been trying to give to the world. And I think that's quite nice. It's quite a nice handoff. And of course, there's a little, there's a lingering look when you sort of realize maybe he's a little more regretful than he's letting on. And there's the symbolic exchange of the ring. He gives the ring to Wally. But I think it works. for something that came to me as a this is going to happen to Barry whether you like it or not, deal with it. I think it's quite a nice way to handle it. And P.S. the story's not over. You know,
It's not.
nothing is ever truly over in superhero comics. So that's almost certainly not my last word on this subject, but I think it works as it currently is.
I hope we get to see that, sort of unfold in the next however long your run goes on, which I hope is forever running, as maybe they say, as long as you get to tell the stories that you are willing to tell. You're making me cry too, honestly, with these explanations. It's like it's tearing me like at the heartstrings. It's like I didn't expect to be this emotional on a conversational interview, but
I waffle away. Do stop me when I
no,
start
no,
going.
thank you. Oh, I appreciate. These are what superhero comics are supposed to be. They're supposed to tear at the heartstrings, one way or another. So I appreciate it. I guess like continuity based question now. Maybe you can say, maybe you can't. Do you know if the Barry Iris wedding is in continuity at the moment, or is that something that's out of your penhole to say?
I don't want to say for sure because I don't know.
Okay.
All I can tell you is that when I asked my editor, I've lost track, are they married or aren't they? He said, let's veer towards not for now.
Okay.
So my understanding, which is not perfect, is that they are presently not married.
Okay. That sounds good to hear. Um, and I have to ask a couple of other questions revolving the Flash family, including Max, who I think, like, even earlier on, I mean, he's been, like, I can tell he's one of your favorites. Like, as soon as issue
Very
one hit,
much.
I was like, this guy is a big Max Mercury fan, and I am, all the more here for it. We've seen Bart run around, we've seen everybody else run around. Do you think that he is a character that you are trying to elevate as far as their position goes in the DC universe? And if so, what do you think his niche is in the greater scale of the DC universe?
I mean, it's a great question. I don't know that I have a great answer. I love Max, and I don't know that I can articulate exactly why, other than to return to some of the stuff I was yammering on about before. Like, in my view, some of the very best Flash comics, let alone the best superhero comics, are ones which blend humanity with a sort of spiritual mystery. Like, as soon as we start digging into the science, it either falls apart or it gets too fiddly and fussy. It's a refrain I've waffled about before. Like, these days, if you're writing a fantasy novel, you have to have a goddamn map in the front because
Mm-hmm.
Tolkien put a goddamn map in the front. What that does is it paints you into a corner. What you're doing is you're creating this needlessly restricting thing, a template around which you have to operate. And it's acquiescing to a fan instinct. As a fan of Star Wars, I want to know everything about this universe. As a fan of Dungeons and Dragons or Buffy or Game of Thrones or whatever it is, my instinct as a fan is to crave detail. In the absence of new stories coming at me all the time, I want to know what's that short sword made of? What's at the end of that street? What's that roof made of? More, more, more. Give me more. Part of the job of a creator is to resist that urge because it's the death of all creativity. To give your readers every detail that they want destroys your opportunity to create anything new. So, the sorts of Flash stories that hinge around, we're going to finally explain exactly what science the Speed Force uses and why he can run as fast as he can without bursting into flames and how this thing works and what his boots made of and blah, blah, blah. It's boring. It's so boring, but it'll please somebody somewhere. They'll get to put it in a fact file and sell a poster and blah, blah, blah. Not for me. What I want is it's a bit spooky and it's a bit strange. And Max typifies that
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that he's powerful and strong, but doesn't seem to care very much about how or why it works. He's just that really useful sort of character who always has the answer, but in a way that's disguised as a riddle, because it's not enough to just give your hero an answer. You have to make them come to the answer themselves. And that's Max. Is there a niche for him as a hero in his own right? Probably. Even if it was only read by you and me, I think, think that would be a nice book. It's interesting. Like Max won't feature very strongly in the next arc. I'll admit that straight away, because the first arc, the sort of 12 issue arc or two arcs, depending how you see it, was very much me trying to reconcile all of these different competing tensions around the nexus of Wally. And one of those tensions is to be the figurehead, the sort of the conduit through which the broader Flash family operates. So it was important that they all feature. It was important that we get to see them all. And there are so many moving parts. It's breathless and it's exhausting. And then along came the All In initiative. And the
Mm.
word that went out to all the creative teams was it's going to be a jumping on point. It's got to feel new. It's got to feel different. So almost all of the other teams did sort of what you would expect, which is to say we go bigger and bolder and we're going to change everything and it's going to be epic in scope and we're going to do huge things. And I was like, well, I sort of did that last
You
time.
did. It was like you just got on
Yeah.
14
So,
issues ago. So,
so instead
yeah.
of trying to do big, crazy, cosmic, epic stuff, which we're just through doing anyway, let's go the other way. Let's focus right down on the core family. Let's send them on a camping trip and let's go from there. Now, obviously, me being me, there's a lot more going on than a camping trip. And there's a big twist which drops at the end of issue 14, which we're going to continue to explore, which sort of changes one's perspective on the whole thing. But ultimately, it's about going from big, crazy, cosmic concepts and then narrowing it right down to what it is to be a family. And some of those family members have superpowers, but so what? That's not really the point. We get to have some fun with them using those superpowers, but it's so much more about the connections between a family. So that's where we are with 14.
That is awesome to hear. And I guess like to sort of jump on that, because you talked earlier a little bit about taking the book from Jeremy Adams. And I think it's clear that you've read the run because not only have you sort of kept the same continuity, same core members, same everything. You've also put your own perspective on it, right? Whereas I think Adams is sort of the more hopeful, joyful. Hey, Wally West is back. Like, let's run as fast as we can, and you putting a different spin on it. How was it like thinking about like the creative process and that like you're trying to respect the material back in the past while also putting your own take on it.
I honestly don't think it's that hard. I think the it is a reflection on how it's a reflection on how it's often done that a lot of people immediately assume when they got the gist of the first series I did, when they were like, okay, this Spurrier guy is bringing a slightly more horror sensibility to this story. Linda seems very depressed. Wally seems to be really struggling with the amount of things in his life. Their immediate assumption was that I was going to split the family up. We'd be in a divorce story or a kids who hate their dad story or something like that. And that's kind of lazy. I don't think you have to do that. I think you can start from a perspective of here is a family of people who all love each other and still be able to say, and yet they're not entirely happy. I think that's okay. I love my family, they
Mm-hmm.
love me, but none of us is happy all the time. That's
Right.
that's life. That's just how life works. If if I had done as a certain type of fan demanded, which is to take what Jeremy had created. And remember, Jeremy finished on this really sun-kissed, beautiful, loving note of the family all together. Lynn's just had the baby. It's beautiful. Like, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to do 22 pages of that and then another 22 pages of that? Like, that's not how stories work. That's not how conflict
Mm-hmm.
works. You would be bored stiff if that was all there was. So there's a tightrope between the dumb, lazy version, which is where you come in and you disregard everything that's gone before because, I'm a genius. I've got new ideas. I'm going to create all new stories. And Wally's got a girlfriend now, and Lynn's dead in a fridge, and the kids hate everyone. That's just so boring. Nobody wants that because they love these characters and they love the happy place they've been left. But equally, you have to introduce conflict. conflict has to be creative and imaginative, and it has to continue to reveal things about these characters that weren't previously revealed. Otherwise, it's just stagnant and empty. I was very interested in doing a postnatal depression story, and we didn't and couldn't and should not have called it that because you would be accused of treating it too lightly. It's a heavy thing in its own right, but it felt right to interrogate how it feels to be the mother of a super child and the wife of a superman and the person who is there surrounded by all of these incredible lives moving so fast that you can't even see them. Having had just a little taste of that yourself, that's going to be depressing to suddenly see it all gone. Your freedom has disappeared, your specialness is gone. And so one of the important things in that first arc was to say Lynn has to come to a point of recognizing how special she is without superpowers. And I think we achieved that. I think we got there. And we are certainly continuing to do that.
Mm-hmm.
The next arc, she plays a really important role. So that sort of mentality. Again, I'm waffling on about specifics, but yeah, you sort of have to respect what's come before. And with Jeremy, that wasn't hard because it was a really, really great run. But it was a really great run of quintessential, brightly colored superhero stuff. And I could read that all day, every day, but that is not what they hired me to write.
Mm-hmm.
And I assumed they hired me to write something different because it was time to make a big change to say, behold, the Flash is capable of telling stories that are slightly horrific, telling stories that are psychedelic, telling stories that are action centered, anything. And I maintain this. If you're going to pick a character that you can just tell any story, any sort of story, any genre, the Flash is the one because
Mm-hmm.
you can do pretty much anything with him.
As there is an endless amount of things, and we've already seen it with the way you've manipulated the Speed Force into what the greater metaphorical sense of what it's meant. It's cool to see you take some twists and turns on that. I guess a couple of more questions before we finish out the Flash bit. Hunter Zolomon came back in the Jeff Johns story of the issue 800. Do you plan on incorporating him back into your run at all, or can you not say?
No plans at present.
Okay.
My my idea was so there was this thing in the first two arcs. It was sort of the ultimate poison, the ultimate weapon of destruction in the cosmic plane, which is this sort of sentient tangle of continuity. I imagined, when you're telling a story in the multiverse, there are countless repetitive versions of all these characters. All the different versions of anybody who's ever called themselves the Anti-Flash. There's Zoom and there's Zolomon and there's countless others. And I sort of imagined them as an archetype constantly deleting themselves from the timeline. They're that toxic. They are forever pruning themselves out. They're murdering their own parents by traveling back in time, messing up the linear nature of time itself. And it sort of appealed to me to imagine, rather than seeing them as a million different separate characters, they're like one bubbling, boiling expression of cosmic self-destruction. And when an even greater power, in this case it was our big bads, the Archangels, gathered them all together and tangled them into this knot that they could be deployed as an instrument that's literally capable of killing the creator of everything. So that's sort of the thought process that went into that. As for bringing back Solomon directly, no plans at this time.
Awesome to hear. And a couple of more, I guess they're related to the Flash family. I mentioned Bart earlier, and Bart is one of my favorite speedsters. I grew up with the YJ4 generation because Young Justice was one of the TV shows that I watched when I was growing up as a kid. And it was really cool to see him not only like written by you, but also drawn by Ramon Perez, who I was like, man, I've, there's so many books that I've read Ramon on with Hawkeye and Stillwater with Chip Zdarsky, and now it's like, oh, he's getting to, do your stuff on Flash. And I think he and his generation, I think, have gotten some of the blunt of it with like we either don't know what to do with the character, or they're mismanaged and DC just doesn't fit them in the right parts, or they're not featured enough. Do you plan on having Barton more in your run? And does, I guess, DC have anything up in the folds with him?
I can't speak to the second part of that. I don't know. I would like to. I have to be very careful what I say. In the next arc, so after the arc
Yeah.
I'm doing now, which is all about this camping trip in Skartaris, things take quite a an escalatory tone, and it is my intention to fold back in all the members of the wider family who won't have been very visible during this particular arc. So yes, certainly have a place for Bart. Love him to bits. I love him particularly as a foil to Max
Mm-hmm.
because they are such perfectly diametrically opposed character. I mean, it's sort of what we were talking about earlier on, this
Mm-hmm.
idea that people can only be one or the other. Here you have two characters who are so different,
Mm-hmm.
and yet they share this wonderful symbiotic emotional relationship, the mentor and the mentee, the father and the son, symbolically, I
Right.
mean, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I would say my little boy has ADHD, and Bart becomes this really wonderful walking casebook for that sort of um, hyper focused, easily distracted, and yet utterly decent neurodiversity that we're starting to recognize all around us in the world. We're today in 2024, we're just at the beginning of what I imagine is going to be this cataclysmic change in the way that we understand how people identify themselves as intellectual beings.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those things is we're only just starting to recognize that everybody thinks differently from everybody else. That's beautiful. That would be
I,
so boring if we didn't.
I
And
agree.
Bart is one of those kids. He's a kid who thinks differently, and we love him for it. And he's just such a wonderful expression of the Speed Force because he's all about that sort of do a thing, go here, do
Mm-hmm.
that thing, stop here for 5 hours looking at a single insect. Okay, now go and do this. Now go. And I love that. It's just such a beautiful, charming bit of characterization. So yes, all of which is to say, I love the character. He will definitely make a return, but I can't I can't say much about
All
it.
right, I'm going to be all here for it. And then I guess my last question, for Flash specifically, maybe the last one and a half. You and Mark Waid are going to both write Wally now. I know that it's. I find it so interesting now to see that like I know you probably read all of Waid Flash, and now you're sort of like working in tandem with the guy who quite revolutionized the franchise, like sort of made it today. How does that all work out? Is it? I know that you two are separate. I talked to Wade a couple of weeks ago, and he said that the JLU was going to be pretty distinct in what their cause is. But is there going to be any crossover there? Or is it just going to be like I don't have to worry about like I guess external forces on the book is what I'm trying to call it.
No, it's a good question. The simple answer is quite separate. Um, Mark has only ever been ludicrously generous with his wisdom and his experience and his knowledge of the broader DCU. I mean, there is nobody better.
No
If
one
you
better.
if you're
I agree.
you're sort of even if you're just skimming across the surface of the JLU paradigm, which I have to do because my character is part of that world as well. You need to know a ton of stuff, and I don't. So to have Mark there to help me out is I can't tell you how valuable that is. The the slightly more complicated answer, well, the middle answer is that I'm actually going to be doing quite a lot of JLU stuff.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
in a way that doesn't it's very complicated to explain this without giving away an awful lot of spoilers, but in a way that, how should I put this? Two steps back.
Okay.
The beauty the beauty of Mark's new JLU setup is that you can think of it at a bit of a remove as a precinct-based procedural, like an NYPD Blue
Right.
or one of those.
Hmm.
Um, to the extent that you can tell stories about these heroes going out and doing things, or being in the base and having conversations, investigating stuff, coming up with solutions, without it feeling like that can't also be occurring in Mark's book.
Hmm.
By which I mean both of those things can be happening without appearing to tread on each other's toes. It's a precinct, it's busy.
Right.
Those guys over there are dealing with Mark's thing. These guys over here are dealing with another thing. There's countless different things going on. It's always this Brownian motion of relationship and conflict and resolution.
Hmm.
And I mean, even if that weren't the case, it would work because we as comics readers are sophisticated enough to not mind too much when Wolverine's on 14 different teams and Batman's in books. Like
Hmm.
in the real world, that wouldn't possibly work. And yet we have this clever little blind spot that says, I'm not going to think about that too hard because I'm enjoying these stories too much. So it doesn't
Hmm.
matter. But in as much as it could matter, this precinct vibe allows us to say, at points in my story, we're going to see Wally doing Justice League stuff that isn't treading on Mark's toes, and his stuff isn't treading on my toes, and that's okay, and it works
Hmm.
really nicely. The thing I can't talk about is that I have come up with a really, though I flatter myself to say it, really clever little detail that speaks to all of this stuff and to all of the character stuff I was talking about before, vis-a-vis Wally feeling like he's stretched thin, feeling like he's trying to do too many things at once, which gives me the excuse to have my cake and eat it. And I can't say any more than that, other than that you'll understand somewhere in issue 15, you'll get it, and it all works really well.
It's gonna be, man, this is so awesome. I can't wait to read issue 15. And if you guys are watching this, I have every single graphic up above telling you how much Flash is, what the stories are about, where to get Volume 1 and Volume 2, which is coming out next month with the new DC Bullet logo. So consider me all the more hyped for the rest of your Flash run. While I still have you here, is it okay if I ask you a couple quick questions about Hellblazer? Maybe we can push
Post,
over a big conversation with another time, if you are willing to do so.
post.
So you are back on the character, and I remember you a couple of years ago, um, on a blog, just like sort of disappointed. I'll keep it that way with the tenure being cut because of COVID
Furious.
and other and other external deeds. So, what made you say, "Let's go write some more Hellblazer"?
I mean, it was never a question of not wanting to be honest. It was quite the opposite.
Hmm.
So I think it was 2019 we started writing the first arc, and we got up to 13 issues, and then it just sort of all got taken away from us. And I say that as if I blame somebody, and I don't. Never did. We were sad, we were angry, but it wasn't like somebody pandemic was hitting, profit margins were collapsing all over comics. Everything needed to change. The safety thresholds that we had been above the whole way through suddenly changed, and it simply was not financially viable. I'm putting words into the mouth of some financial person somewhere. This is what I assume they were saying. It was no longer viable to keep doing that comic. And it wasn't like a total surprise. We got to finish our story. We had to finish it a little bit quicker than we'd intended. So we had been working on the basis that there was going to be this whole second arc in which John and his little crew of ne'er-do-wells went to America. We weren't sure whether we were going to get to that straight away. We weren't sure whether that was going to be something that we'd put on hold. But what we had it all in our minds, ready to go. And then the axe fell. We were gutted. We managed to finish the arc as it was, but it very much ends on a like we tied up all the loose ends except for the one that sort of launched the next arc, the new arc, which is that John's dead. He doesn't seem to have a heartbeat anymore. Something has happened which has caused him to be a dead man walking. And at the end of that arc, which was unbelievably well received critically, it was like you're not really supposed to pay attention to reviews as a creator, but there's often no other way of gauging how well you're doing
Right.
because it's very difficult these days to get sales figures. If you try and talk to fans on one of the social media networks, you're only going to get the extremes. You're going to get the people who hate you and wish you were dead, and you're going to get the people who think you can't ever make a mistake, and that's not useful to
It's
anybody.
I get it.
Um, so you do occasionally check reviews. To that extent, that first arc of Hellblazer and the new arc, by the way, was the most consistently highly reviewed book for every single one of its months. So people loved it. To take a couple of steps backwards and sideways, my contention has always been with books of this sort, by which I mean Vertigo-esque, cerebral books that try to be about something quite important, that you can't judge their success or failure on the basis of how well they do as single issues.
Hmm.
It's lovely to be able to sell a ton of single issues on a month by month basis, but these are books that, when they're collected, will sit on a shelf in a bookstore and will keep selling for 20 years. And somebody will buy one this week and they'll replace it. Somebody will buy another one next week and then replace it. And it's slow, but it's steady. And after 20 years, it's earned so much money compared to that first single issue that you don't care about the whole idea of issues anymore. That's my understanding of how Vertigo and Vertigo-esque books work and should work. So it annoyed us that it was cancelled because single issue sales had fallen below a threshold.
Hmm.
During the intervening time from 2020 through to like late 22, early 23, our incredible editor, Chris Conroy, who believed in us and never stopped advocating for us, managed to persuade the right people. It's that simple. Personnel changed, management came and went, words were put into the right ears, and at some point, I couldn't even tell you when, he sent me and Aaron an email saying, I think we could carry on, guys. I think we've got another shot at this. And we sort of rubbed our hands with glee and cleared the decks as much as possible, and we dug out the old ideas we had had for the continuing arc, and we dusted them down, and we thought, well, this was good, but if we're going to treat this as a relaunch, and all we knew really, other than a few of the little plot points along the way, was that the title was going to be Dead in America, and it was going to be about John arriving on the East Coast and traveling across America. It's like a road trip story with these other characters who he has doomed because you can't be caught up in John's wake without being doomed. And the story was going to be about his attempt to save them all, to save himself, to somehow remove the damnation that he had imposed upon his son, who doesn't know he's his son, all of that stuff. And what we found along the way as we restarted was that that started opening doors to do a ton of other things, to talk about the nature of America as it is today, to talk about the way that America perceives itself and the world around it, and sort of more importantly, for those of us who love comics and Vertigo comics, to dig into the delicious roots of some of the best and biggest Vertigo stories of all. I'm thinking of Saga of the Swamp Thing, I'm thinking of Sandman, and finding clever ways that they interweave, and there are gaps that were never quite handled in the original stories, which we can step into and make ourselves a part of this beautiful tapestry. which kind of felt not only a really interesting way of continuing and sort of tying up the loose ends of John's story, but also symbolically, for those of us who love and loved Vertigo, a sort of love we were teenagers, Vertigo having been missing, presumed dead for quite a long time. So it was kind of wonderful just to jump forward slightly that as we finish this journey, Vertigo is now being relaunched for a new era.
It
So
is, but it's so weird seeing the black label like logo on your book when I'm like, Constantine has always had Vertigo on it up until they decided to slash the line. Now it's back, and it's like, is he? I guess that was like another quick question before we sort of wrap this up. Is this the same Constantine that we've seen on the Justice League Dark Team during 2011, or is this a brand new John that's like in not in the same continuity threshold as all of the other DC characters?
um the simple answer is it's a different character. For me.
Mhm.
The the more complicated version is that um I think the version of John Constantine who shows up in the DCU is not a bad character.
Mhm.
I think that it's not the same character that I read when I was 17 and
Mhm.
reading Hellblazer for the first time. This takes us slightly back to something I was talking about before, which is this very sophisticated thing that goes on in a reader's mind, which allows them to pass PARSE, I mean,
Mhm.
different versions of something, um, different threads of reality that can't possibly coexist, but it allows them to reconcile them neatly because the story's good enough that it's worth doing. So if you're the sort of person who's sitting there saying, "Ah, but is this the same continuity? Is it different? Where does the line draw? Where does this happen?" I think I can only speak for myself. I think that takes one out of the story. I think that that's looking for the wrong detail.
Mhm.
And again, I spoke earlier on about the fans' need for detail, the fans' need for clarity. I understand all of that, but actually, as a creator, if you can come to this rich and wonderful place where you say, it doesn't matter. Do you like the character now? Because if so, enjoy the story. It doesn't matter whether it's the same character who, I don't know, beat a dragon with Zatanna in blah blah blah
Right.
issue 50. Do you like this character? That's a slightly disingenuous answer because in my head and in my heart of hearts, there is a direct through line from Vertigo Hellblazer, which sort of jumps over the whole DCU experiment, Justice League Dark, Zatanna, all of that stuff, and reconnects with the story as we begin to tell it. Now, I tried to reconcile all of this stuff in the very first issue of the first
Mhm.
arc, in which John sort of encounters a version of himself in some posited future where magic is falling apart and it's all very special effectsy and all very Harry Pottersy. And that actually was a solution that was suggested by Neil Gaiman when it was proposed to him that these new titles be launched. He remembered that in an issue of Books of Magic, this sort of future version of John Constantine had been discovered dying in the midst of a magical war. And Neil thought that was quite a fun way of bringing that John back into our world to sort of sidestep all the questions of is he alive? Is he dead? What world's he in? I used that and I think it works. But I was very clear in that issue to deliberately fudge it. Like there's a moment when all that stuff is happening and John's being really cynical. Oh, all these bloody light shows, all these silly effects, demons in the sky. That's not really what you expect from a Hellblazer story. That's
Mhm.
far too big and
Mhm.
bold and
Yep.
silly. And just when you think it's a multi-dimension story, he wakes up in the same asylum,
Mhm.
mental institute that he's frequently been a visitor of. And it was just to sort of leave it ambiguous,
Hmm.
because I don't really want people to believe one thing or another. I don't want people to think, ah, well, this is definitely John from Earth 357 who's come through a portal, and that's not important to the story. What I want is my John, my hard smoking, hard drinking bastard with a conscience who
Hmm.
is doomed and hateful, and you wouldn't want to be his friend, but it's safe to read about him from a distance. I want him to be back in the world we recognize with all of its problems and its politics and its divisions, doing what he does, which is to make things a little bit better by making things a lot worse. And that's my John, and that's what the current story is all about.
That's awesome. No, I can't wait to delve if ever have you back on. Hopefully as soon as possible. I know that you're a busy guy, but hopefully as soon as possible to talk more about Hellblazer because I've got the Delano omnibus coming my way, so I can read some of that earlier stuff, and I'll eventually
So
get
good.
to the Ennis, and it all sounds so exciting because your Hellblazer was my first experience like solo, anyways, with the character. Like I had read him in New 52 and Rebirth as part of other teams, but it all felt a little bit weird because I talked to some other people and it's like, oh, like John was this guy. I'm like, okay, I want to read some more of those. So thank you for bringing me into the fold with your amazing first series with Aaron Campbell and Matthias Bergara, and I can't wait to finish off Dead in America, which
Thank you.
I hope that you and Chris Conroy someday can tell whoever is at the DC collected editions to get an omnibus of this because I would love to have this in oversized on my bookshelf and for others to see it in that way too. Get the Campbell and Jordi Belair colors all blown up. Like that would be tremendous, I think.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it is my understanding that this current arc, Dead in America, which finishes with issue 11,
Hmm.
I think that's going straight to hardcover. I
Hmm.
don't know what size, but
It's
it's
standard
definitely
size, yeah.
a big. But yeah, no, we're definitely hoping for something a little bit more omnibusy.
No, I completely agree. Like it would be nice to get your like Nightcrawler stuff in Omnibus too. There's a lot of stuff that like I would love to get yours. You know, like I'm reading Coda, and again we can talk about this another time. But to see that like blown up in deluxe
Oh,
versus the standard trades is like, you know, because I collect big books mostly,
yeah.
and to have it all in, I mean those are the ways that I enjoy it, and I appreciate yeah
So
all.
you may already know this, but my next book with Matthias, the guy who did Coda and Step by Bloody Step and some of those first Hellblazer arc issues, I'm doing a book with him at Distillery where they standardize
Mm-hmm.
those
Yep.
big, beautiful
The big
European
magazine.
albums.
Yep.
Really, really lovely, and it's such a great format for artists who are interesting. This is a whole separate story, but there is I think a sort of creeping danger that we celebrate artists who look like every other artist, whereas what I want is a really interesting, unique style that's fitting for the story I'm reading. And that's why I write Hellblazer for Aaron and why I write these insane fantasies for Matthias. And it's part of the privilege of being a writer that you can be doing all these different projects at once and tailor making them for the artist you're working with.
That's so awesome to hear. But yes, that wraps up. I think this very long interview. Thank you for your time, Sai. If I may ask, where can the people find you? For those who might not be aware already of your presence on
Sure.
social
There's
media.
a website, simonspurrier.com. I'm trying very hard not to go near Twitter at the moment, so I'm over on Blue Sky, and it's just at Spurrier.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Please like and subscribe, and also click the notification bell so you know every single time I upload a comic related video or a video with one of these awesome creators that I got to talk to today. That'll be it for me. I am Dom of X. You be you. Take care and dominate the day wherever you are.